with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you so much for this beautiful evening. Thank you for everybody who's joining our workshop tonight. And I ask for anybody who's still on their way that you would keep them safe. And Lord, as we navigate PowerPoints today, Lord, we thank you for these tools that are available to us as we go about our daily lives, whether it's our jobs or our ministry. Lord, PowerPoint is a tool that we can use to bring you honor and glory. And so I ask that you would help us to explore it and learn to use it well. And Lord, we love you. It's in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so this is PowerPoints that pop. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to take you through some philosophy of PowerPoint, and then we're going to work through creating a PowerPoint from scratch. And then I'm going to show you a PowerPoint that I've created in the past, and I made some tweaks to it so that it's not quite as pretty. And we'll see if we can make some recommendations to that PowerPoint to make it a little bit more strategic, a little bit more on point. All right, so PowerPoint. So Craig, you said that you've used PowerPoint before. From your standpoint, what's the point of using a PowerPoint? Why not just stand up and talk?
The visuals.
Mm-hmm.
Picture's worth 1,000 words, maybe 1,000,000.
Stole the words right out of my mouth. Sometimes there's just something about having that visual aid that helps people. It helps people track, helps them to stay on point. And PowerPoint's not the only visual aid that people have used in the past. We used to use things like flannel graphs. We actually had somebody in Bible study the other day whip out an old flannel graph, and I was like, oh, I'm back in Sunday school. It was great. But we use all sorts of visual aids whenever we're presenting or whenever we're teaching, and PowerPoint's just one of those tools. And it is primarily that visual element, that visual aid. Now, PowerPoint can do a few things for us. First of all, obviously, it grabs the audience's attention, but it can help keep us as the presenters organized. I know whenever I'm teaching through a passage, I'm actually just finished teaching through the book of Genesis, and there's so much content. There are so many things that I could wander down to explore. And I only have like 40 to 45 minutes to teach, not 2 hours. And so I need to have some points to help say, okay, what do I want to focus on? What are the main things? And it helps to keep me on track.
Good point.
Additionally, it helps the audience to sort of feel like there's a structure to what we're doing. We're not just sort of floating through the universe and they're like, okay, there's something that's going on here. We're moving from point A along to point B, along to point C. And some PowerPoints, you're going to more clearly see the structure and organization than others, but it definitely can provide that structure for you. Now, in order for us to do that, I like to advise people to start off with some type of outline. Now, sometimes, especially in school, you guys are going to be starting with a paper that's already complete. And in that case, I like to sort of work backwards a little bit and say, okay, what's the main point of this paragraph? Can I write it out in a word or phrase? How about the next paragraph? How about the next one? And then you sort of get some of your basics outlines that you can start to work toward your PowerPoint from. Sometimes your organization is going to be a little bit more organic. So the PowerPoint that I'm going to show you guys later is going to be based off of a passage from Philippians, and it's just broken down based on verses. So you're like, well, that's the structure. It's the verses itself.
Okay.
So not only do we have structure both for ourselves and for the audience, but PowerPoint is a giant highlighter. It's saying, hello, these are the things that out of what I'm saying that are the most important, or maybe things that you want to draw special attention to, or things that you can't highlight well with words. So like you said, a picture worth 1,000, sometimes 1,000,000 words if you're trying to emphasize, okay, well, we see suffering over in China or in Zimbabwe. Like sometimes if you can just put a picture up there, the audience can instantly get what you're saying instead of taking 5 minutes to tell a story. You can do that all with a simple picture. If you're doing stuff with a business, obviously you're using probably charts and graphs to make points that it's really hard for the most human minds to see numbers. And so PowerPoint is a really strategic way to do that. Also, I'm always tempted to do everything on PowerPoint and put everything that I say up on the PowerPoint, but you don't necessarily need to put everything that you're saying on the PowerPoint, but just emphasizing the things that maybe again, are either important or harder to understand. So if I'm explaining a Greek or Hebrew word, that might be something that I want to put up on the screen. So the word, the interpretation, maybe a couple synonyms, so that it's not just, boom, I say the word and then keep rolling, and they're like, wait, what was that? And they have something to focus their attention in on.
Mhm.
The other thing that's nice about a PowerPoint is that it can be more professional than just using a whiteboard. Now, whenever I teach my classes, I do like to use a whiteboard because to me, it feels more engaging. And I feel like for our younger audiences, sometimes having something that's going on live helps to capture them more. But I'm going to be very honest and say that my handwriting, even on a whiteboard, is just not quite as professional as a PowerPoint. And so PowerPoint allows us to be professional with the information that we're presenting. Now, oh, look, and there we are. Look. And here are our 3 points. Here they are. Now, anytime we do a PowerPoint, this happens to me all the time. We want to try to remember what's coming. Now, I can't do this whenever we're recording a presentation like this on the screen. And we'll get to this whenever toward the end of the presentation, whenever we're going over presenting a PowerPoint. I like to, though, whenever I'm teaching, go in presenter mode because it'll show you a preview of what's coming next so that you don't have moments like that where you're like, oh no, I was supposed to hit the advanced slide and we move forward and I missed the moment. Even with that shortcut though, I'm gonna again be honest and say that I still forget things and I'll advance the slide and be like, oh, also that was on the screen. So, but using the presenter mode is definitely helpful. Now we're going to talk through some design principles, and then again, we're not just going to talk through them. At some point, I'm going to actually pause this formal presentation. We're going to go over to a blank PowerPoint, and if you have access to a PowerPoint on either this computer or on a separate computer, definitely encourage you to sort of jump in and be playing around as we're going through so you can sort of experiment along the way. But again, just talking through these design principles here. First of all, alignment. Something that helps your PowerPoint presentations to look crisp and professional is to have things aligned well. These 3 points, these first 3 are all aligned on the same line this way. And then these points are aligned down the middle this way. All 3 of these elements are lined up with the center of the screen. Now, sometimes you're going to have trouble doing this. So whenever we get over to building a PowerPoint, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks for helping to keep that alignment smooth. But having things in alignment definitely helps keeping your presentations professional. Second, readability. Especially if you're dealing with tables and charts and numbers, or in my case, verses where you're displaying verses on the screen. There can be an issue if your font is too small and you're like, oh, I just can't see that. Most people recommend using 24-point font or larger. Definitely if you're dealing with an audience who are either sitting farther away or may have some visual difficulties. They're not strong with their eyeball game. It's not a bad idea to start with a font that's even larger. And along with that, so I am just young enough that I still like using fun fonts. However, fun fonts aren't always readable fonts. And so we want to make sure that we have a font. Even in this presentation, if I was critiquing it, I might say, okay, well, it's readable. But if I was putting it up on the screen, some of these as it gets smaller, you want it to be a plainer font like Arial or Calibri or something, or Helvetica. It's just something that's a little bit simpler so that the eye can see it even from far away. Related, but not exactly the same thing, is contrast. Now, obviously, whenever we are writing our text, we want our text to be a different color than our background. Self-explanatory. But even images or things in the background, you want them to be different enough so that you can see it. So on this screen, we have a whole bunch of different colors. I have this dark brown font inside an orange little circle here. I have a different color orange right up against the sort of pale baby blue background. And then we have some darker blue for this header right here, along with some random design elements all the way through. Whenever we get into actually looking at the design features in PowerPoint, I'll show you the color theme, and it'll have a whole bunch of colors laid out sort of in a list. And what I like to counsel people is don't pick two shades that are right next to each other, because they're going to be so similar that they're going to wash each other out and you're not going to be able to see it. I struggle with this sometimes if I want to be fun with my background image, and the background image has a lot of exciting features. It can be difficult to pick a color that's different enough in order to have contrast so that you can see the entire thing. And again, I'll show you a little bit of a work around that a little bit later. Fourth design principle is using white space. While this particular slide does have several things on it, you may notice that there's a lot of blank space. We have all of this space around each of the letters, each of the numbers, and there's essentially place for your eyes to rest. Again, I can be tempted to fill up every single corner of each of my PowerPoint slides. So I'm like, I have to use up every bit of space, right? But the thing is, it's not like paper where we're like, okay, we can save the trees. It's just, hey, it's something that I can create digitally that people can look at. And so there's something about the human eye that appreciates having white space and being able to sort of, again, rest in between images. Plus, it allows us to better emphasize the things that are important. So the more space that we create around the important things, the easier it is to draw attention to them. So we want to strategically use white space. The next design principle is consistency. So whenever we start off, we'll pick a theme, we'll pick a format, we'll pick a font size, font color. And then I like to counsel people to whatever you start with, go ahead and stick with. You can duplicate slides, you can do things within a theme, and you can change some things, but it throws the audience off if we were looking at a particular font, a particular style, and then the next slide, everything's completely different. It just helps the audience to have a sense of continuity. And again, it's professional. So we'll show you some tricks along the way with there as well. Images, like you said, are worth 1,000 or 1,000,000 words. And so we definitely want to be using our images, but we want to use them strategically. We don't want to overuse them, throw too many in, and actually we'll go through a list of some faux pas in just a moment, but we definitely we want to be using our images in our PowerPoints. So what do we want to be aware of? What will wreck our PowerPoint slides? Text walls. Now, as somebody who teaches through books of the Bible, this is something that I can very easily tend toward, is to say, you know what, I'm going to put the entire text of something up on the screen, or I'm going to read this entire quote, and then we're going to boop, 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 all the way down. While this is tempting, if you have a wall of text up on your PowerPoint, what's going to happen is your audience is going to stop listening and they're going to start reading. And what doesn't matter what you're saying, if you're actually reading the quote or if you're giving background on the quote, that's just your audience is just going to start reading what's up on the screen. And that's not really effective, because what you want is you want that little bit of a visual image to help what you're saying, but you want your audience to listen to what you're saying. And so we always just want to be aware that anytime we advance the slide and the image goes up, your audience is no longer listening, they're reading. So if they can read it quickly and then put their attention back to you, then that's awesome. But if you put a longer text up, just be aware that your audience is going to be reading it. So if you're reading a passage of scripture or something altogether, great. Go ahead and put that wall of scripture up, but just be ready to advance it in time so that they're not just sort of focused on that wall of text. And we sort of hinted at this, but beware of visually difficult fonts or colors. Again, I love the fonts and the one PowerPoint I'm going to show you, and you're like, probably should have switched out the fonts a little bit. I also really like the color pink. Pink is usually not a strategic choice for PowerPoint font color. It just doesn't contrast well with almost anything, and it's also kind of glaring on the eye. And so we want to pick things that are visually pleasing to the eye and that, again, sync with that easy contrast. We want to avoid excessive images. So you've noticed that I've added all of these different images on the screen. It's really busy now. It's hard to see what's important. We don't really know what's going on, and it just kind of looks crowded. So while we want to use images, we want to use them strategically in a good pixelation, so you don't want to have something that's over pixelated or so small that you can't see it. That can be kind of tricky, but we want to make sure that we're making super duper image choices. Talked about this, but inconsistency. So if we want to highlight something, we can use something like bold or italicized, but I wouldn't change fonts to make a point. I would use something along the lines of doing a bold or perhaps an underline so that they can see, okay, this is something I want to pay a special attention to. Last but not least, excessive exciting transitions. One of the things that we'll go over is transitioning from one slide to another slide and bringing in animations. Now, for me, what I've done for slides so far is I've just been advancing my slides. I haven't had any transitions from one slide to the next. However, especially on this screen, I did use some transitions or some animations on the characters. So these are just fade in, and they just sort of faded in one by one. You'll notice that whenever I advanced to this next animation, these two images went away because I didn't want it to crowd up my space. That's something we can do. Something like this, though, the swirl in, while that is more exciting, well, it's also a little bit distracting. So while you can have some fun transitions, you don't want your audience oohing and awing at the transition. If you've done that, they're no longer really paying attention to the content and they're just wowed by the transition, which maybe have one. You can be like, look, I know how to use the PowerPoint transitions, but we don't want to go too crazy.
Gotcha.
Any questions so far?
Not so far. 'Cause each time that you're putting up a new slide that has information from the last slide, you're just basically pulling up the old slide and editing it.
Actually,
That
so
was the
that
question.
is something you can do. That is something that you can do. You can have a slide and then duplicate it and add something new. I've done that before if you have something tricky going on with images. However, this is actually a completely different tool, which I'm very excited to show you, called animation. I'll show you in a hot second. So let's keep on going so that I can show you. Don't forget. Okay. Don't know what's going on there. Why is there? There we go. Okay. So whenever you're constructing your PowerPoint, you have three essential options. First option is to completely do it yourself. You start from ground zero and then you just add in all of your own images. You create your background completely from scratch and you're not using any themes from Microsoft. You're not using any templates. Just do it yourself. I do this oftentimes with my Bible study things because I'll create a workbook and I'll use an image for the workbook cover, and then I'll reuse that for my PowerPoint slides, and I'll use that as the background. That has a lot of disadvantages because everything is manual, so the fonts are all manual. There's no color scheme that's affiliated with it. I just have to sort of guess and hope that I'm making good design choices. But do it yourself is always an option. Next is using one of the Microsoft themes or templates. I'll probably use the word template, but if you go into Microsoft PowerPoint, it's called themes. So I'm trying to use that language, but I'll probably end up calling it a template. This is what people tend to use the most often, and this is what I'm going to show you as we're working through together, how to start with one of the themes or templates. Most of the time, students are going to end up using a Microsoft PowerPoint theme or template. A third option that is available is to go on the World Wide Web and to find some other template platform. This slideshow that we're using right now is from SlidesGo, and platforms like this are nice because it gives you a whole bunch of just starter slides, and you can make changes, you can change the background, but it has a lot of it sort of pre-set up for you. Now, one of the disadvantages for this is that it gives you so much that it can be overwhelming to say, oh my gosh, well, I don't need, there are 60 slides here. I don't need 60 slides. I need 4. And so starting with something like this kind of template can be too much of a good thing. However, I do appreciate SlidesGo. For their free things, all they ask is that you show this finishing slide to give them credit, which is nice. So that's the end of this part of the presentation. What we're going to do now is I'm going to navigate over to a blank-ish presentation right here. And actually, we can do it just just from this one. Craig, do you have access to PowerPoint right now?
As far as I know.
Cool beans. So if you can, I would pull it up. But before I do that, I do just want to briefly show you. So that one slide that we were working through, and I said, hey, well, and you were saying, hey, well, it's just one slide duplicated over and over, and you just advance to the next one. That is something that you can do, but what I actually did here was I just used animations. So, and we'll explore animations in just a moment. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but that's what all of these numbers are. It's all on the one slide, but I just used this animation feature. It's very fun and exciting. So in PowerPoint, if you don't already have the app open, you would go into wherever the apps are and select PowerPoint to open it. If you, for whatever reason, already have some sort of PowerPoint slide open, you're going to go into File. And then you have a couple of places where you can look for themes or templates. First is just right here, right on the start. You can go over here and click More Themes. And it'll pull up a whole bunch for you. And these are nice. They're not bad.
Okay, so they have it set up quite similar to Word.
Yes, it's very
Okay.
similar to Word. It's all under the umbrella organization of Microsoft, so you can see the similar minds behind each of the different pieces of software. Now, if you look through these and you're like, none of these are really calling to my soul, you can certainly just start off with a blank presentation. And from here, you, again, have options. You can either start doing things, and like if I wanted to insert an image and start playing around with stuff, I could, or I could use some of their themes, or even more options. Look, there's so many options. On the right-hand side here, we have this designer feature. I only kind of like designer. It's like AI, so it prompts ideas. If you add an image, then it'll play with the image and give you additional suggestions for how to redesign your slides. If you use one of their prefab ones, it will give you additional slides to work with that are sort of in the theme. I have found so far that I'm not terribly impressed with it. I usually find that they tend to violate my design principles of contrast and readability. So I tend not to use these design features over here on the right. However, you can certainly play around with them. Those are options for you. I'm not going to use them today, but it is something else that's new and hopefully improving and will continue to improve as we go forward. Now you can either close this, or if you were like, no, leave me alone, you can say stop showing ideas for a new presentation, and it'll stop until you reopen PowerPoint from scratch.
Okay.
Now, if I don't just want to operate with this white thing, I don't want to pull in my own pictures. I'm going to go up here to the menu, and I'm going to go to the design menu. And then it'll show me some additional themes right here. Now, it only shows me 5 or 6 right here. So to see the rest of them, I'm going to hit this drop down. And then it'll show me a few additional. So you'll notice that these are not as varied as the ones that we saw on the starter screen. So if you were like, I like some of the ones on that starter screen better, you can always go back, use one of those. We can go ahead and just start with any of these. So you can look around and say, okay, I kind of like this one, kind of like that one. Any ones that you select, once you select them, you'll notice up here on the top right, stop suggesting ideas, designer. Goodness gracious. On the top right over here, we can change the theme. We can do some variants. And what that'll do is it will change both the background right here, and it will change the font options. So if I highlight over top of the font, let's title this Power. So if I wanted to change the font, right over here, see how it gave me theme colors. So it said, hey, your background is this color. These are a set of colors that work well with this particular background. So we have some greens, a little bit of blue, and reds. Now, if I changed it and I was like, ooh, perfectly, I can do my pink. Pink. If I do that highlight, go back, now they're different colors. And so whatever we decide, we're gonna want to choose that at some point and then say, okay, these are the colors that I'm going to stick with. This is the theme that I'm going to stick with. So how many options does it give us? Just these four. There should be a whole bunch that you could select. You could do brown. I mean, it's red, but it's brown. So if you're doing something that's a little bit more professional in nature, something that's not as geared toward college age students, you might do something that's a little bit more subtle, the more browns, blacks, silvers. If you're dealing with college students who are fresh out of high school, you may choose the pink. Who knows? So I have this right here. Don't mind this font. Now this down here, this is only, it's a small font. It's only 18-point font. Now, once I have this here and I'm like, hey, I know that I'm going to be using this as subtitles. So let's say I put my name. I'm going to have this on the title slide. But that's too small, right? We said that the smallest that we want to go is 24-point font. I can just change it on this page. So if I change it here, make it 24-point font, great. I've changed it for this slide, but if I do a new slide, and I can either just select new slide or I can hit this drop down and then it'll give me a whole bunch of options, which will vary depending on what type of content I want to upload. So I might want to do something where I'm comparing two images side by side, or maybe I have, they don't have the columns on this one, which is unfortunate because that's what I use all the time is columns. I most often will use a title with content, something like that. And you'll notice that it went back to 18-point font. Now, one way that you can sort of fix this is to put your text. So first point, highlight the entire thing and then change the font size to whatever you want it to be. So let's say I want it to be 36 because that's a lot easier to read. And I want to say main idea 1. Make this a little bit larger. And then I can just duplicate this slide. And I can do that by either using the shortcut Command or Control D, or I can 2-finger tap and then just hit the duplicate button. And then I can use that as a template. The other thing that I can do is I can go back up to the menu at the top, go into slideshow, view, close but not quite. And then out of all of these options here, I'm going to go into the slide master view. And the slide master is where I'm going to go if I want to make changes that are going to apply across all of the slides, no matter what kind of slide I add. So I'm going to go up to the top level. And if I wanted to change, for example, the font on the, whatever this is, header, I could change that to, instead of Century Gothic, maybe I wanted to do anything else, literally anything else. Just need to pick one, Aptos Nero or whatever. And then let's say I want to make it bigger too, because I like to have things very readable. I teach ladies Bible study, and in my morning group, we just need to see things a little bit better. So we need to have things nice and large. Then I'm going to highlight everything in this level. And I don't want anything that's smaller than 24 points. Right now, the smallest font size is 12, which is a lot smaller than I want. So I'm going to go ahead and make the entire thing larger. All right, now my first level is going to be 36 points, which makes me happy. So most of my text is going to be either 36-point font or 32-point font. So those are just changes in the master slide. So in order to see anything on the slides that we've made, we're going to have to exit out of slide master. I'm going to go back up to the menu, go into the slide master part of the menu, and I'm going to close master view. And then you'll notice on each of these pages, it's changed the font and it's changed the size. So that's something that you can do in the slide master thing. If you decide, you know what, I screen tested it and my font is just too small, or the contrast, I thought it was a strong enough contrast, but whenever I put it up on the big screen, it wasn't enough contrast. So that's a way that you can sort of quick and dirty get in there, make those changes, and it'll apply across the rest of your slides. So master slide master can be helpful. And again, that's in view. So view and then slide master right there. So that's some ways that you can start to make changes there. Some additional things that I wanted to make sure that we highlighted. Now I have over here all of these different elements. Now this is another PowerPoint that you can, in one of these other templates in Microsoft PowerPoint. What I've done over here is I've played around with the text box. Now, text box is just the box in which text comes. So hence text box. They are nice because you can move them and make adjustments. And there are some different design elements that you can do that can either help you or hurt you depending on what you're doing. If you're just operating within a PowerPoint and you're happy with it. So if I go back over to our first one over here, notice that it already has everything lined up so that this is pretty close to the top. What I might not like is that our point is right in the middle of the box, and maybe I don't want this to be in the middle of the box. Maybe I want it to be closer to the top. If I do want to change that, I'm going to have to go up here inside the home menu. I always click on the wrong one. Is it this one? It is this one. And instead of having it aligned to the center of the text box, you're going to align it with the top of the box. I tend to have my points organized like this. Occasionally, I will have them in the middle, just sort of depends on the presentation and what I'm doing with it, how I want my stuff to be organized. Now, occasionally, you may say, you know, I don't want my points to be that close to this top thing right here. I want to add more space. You can click and drag the text box to anywhere, and you can line it up with anything. However, once we start messing with the text box, then we're starting to mess with one of our design principles, which is alignment and consistency. So if I wanted to have this be my new organization for the thing, first of all, I would want to see, well, is this actually lined up with anything? Now, what I like to use is the ruler over here. I always show the ruler on both my PowerPoints and my Microsoft Word presentation things so that I can see what's going on. If for whatever reason your ruler isn't displaying, you can go into the view menu and just check that little box right there to turn your ruler on and off. Some people also like to use these additional tools. So grid lines will pop up all of these up on the screen so that you can be like, ooh, I'm just going to go ahead and drag this right onto this grid line right there. Now, my computer is a little bit finicky on a laptop, so it's like, I don't want to do that. Touchpad for the win. I personally don't really like this view because it makes it's a little bit hard for me to see what's going on. So I personally don't like to use the grid lines. I do like to use the ruler. Guides are nice because it just shows you sort of the middle, what's right in the middle, those center points. You can also be like, hey, if I want to align something with the 1 inch mark, I can drag it to there and sort of help me line it up with that, and it'll snap it to that point. So if I wanted to align it with the 1 inch margin, I could do that. The thing that I most often use is the ruler, but those are additional things that are helpful. Now, if I did decide that this was going to be my alignment point, then if you notice over here, so these two are not the same. So I would probably delete this first slide and then just duplicate this from here on out if I wanted to mess with the alignment so that everything would be aligned the same way. Now, again, not every slide is going to be exactly the same. So you may have another slide that looks like a comparison slide. And so you're going to be inserting images to compare side by side or charts to go side by side. And so that could be an idea too. Again, if we look at the alignment here, it's back up to where it was on our very first slide. So what I could do is I could go into the view, go into the slide master, and I could change the alignment on the actual boxes. So I could say, you know what, anytime I add this type of slide, I want it to be aligned right there. If I wanted to.
Okay.
It depends on how much content you're creating and how much one thing is like another. A lot of what I do is with verses. And again, whenever we show you the presentation, you'll see, okay, so there's a lot of room for things to get really wacky and crazy here. So if we go back over here, you'll notice again, it dropped it down for us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in your context, you're doing business presentations. In school context, sometimes a teacher will ask, okay, do a compare and contrast with these two passages. You want to have these two things side by side, or you need again, a chart or a table to be on display. Whenever we're using charts or tables, we're usually starting with something like Excel. And so if I have this Excel spreadsheet here, sample personal monthly budget. Sure. And then let's say that I wanted to use this one right here, this housing budget, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to copy from here the title of housing. And then let's say I want to do the whole thing all the way to the subtotal. I'm going to copy this. And then I'm going to go back over to my PowerPoint presentation. And there's probably too much going on with this one. I'm going to go ahead and just do a new slide where I can embed content right there. Now, I could go from here and see if I could insert a chart or a graph, or I could just paste it in. So let's see what it looks like if I just paste it in. So right here, what do you notice about the chart?
It's entirely too small.
It is entirely too small, and it's not themed in. So we have lots of problems here. I have lots of problems.
You've got a
So
square chart in a rectangular space, if that
yes,
matters.
so many problems. So you can always sort of scroll through the options here. So if I keep text only, then things get really, really wonky. I could try this. Now you're noticing that this isn't really smooth, right? It's the information is not gelling well. Now I could, let's say I want to go ahead and we're just going to use the destination style just so that it keeps some of the font size. Now I can make some changes here. So let's say I wanted to make this longer. So I can click and drag here and just drag this out this way. And then you see, it's hard to see, but there's those little red dotted lines that let me know that it aligned with this right here. So my alignment is good there. I'm going to do the same thing with the other side just so I can have some alignment. Now, this is a lot of points. Frankly, there are so many points that I'm not sure that it's worth having this much information up on the screen, because the reader or audience rather is just going to be overwhelmed with the information. There's nothing that's clear. Even if I make all of this font larger, it's really not going to be an effective use of my presentation. It's not a useful tool. And so if I did want to use this chart, I would want to perhaps see what information is the most necessary. Perhaps I want to just do the parts of the table where there's a difference between what was projected and where we're over budget, because maybe we're having a family meeting about how we can't stick to a budget. Maybe that's our difficult family conversation of the night. And so I'm just going to eliminate everywhere where we're doing well, because we don't need to talk about that. We just need to talk about where we are overspending. Delete all these. Doesn't like me delete rows. It's too small. It's too small, Craig. I can't see it. And then I want to change the font size. So I can highlight each one of these and I can make them 24-point font is the minimum. And then these ones over here. And now it's at least a lot more readable. Now I messed up my alignment whenever I made it smaller. So I'm going to drag it down until it gives me a happy, now if it doesn't give me a happy center line, I'm going to be so sad. Well, let's go ahead and get our tool here. Let's turn our guides on. And let's say I wanted to make sure, so if this is the exact middle of the entire screen, and then I want to go to the 1 inch. Nope. Lord have mercy on us. We just want to use the technology. Okay. And now it's aligned with that. I can go ahead and turn my guides off. And then this is a chart that shows the information. Now, charts are nice. It's nice to have some tables in there. Sometimes, again, I tend to prefer tables if I'm comparing words to words. I find that for a presentation, people usually visualize things a little bit better with some sort of actual graphical chart. So if I wanted to take this information and make a graph from it, so I might go back to our home menu, go to a new slide, title and content. This is a chart. And then I can go ahead and add something right from here. So they do have stock images, they have pictures and all of these things. For using a chart, it's down here at the bottom, so I can click Insert Chart. And it popped up with a column chart, which we can certainly use. We can look through and sort of figure out, okay, what kind of chart would be the most useful for us in the information that we're trying to compare. This one seems like it might be helpful for us. Let's go ahead and select OK. Once you add the chart, then you're going to want to edit it. Now it popped up right away with our information. Now, if you didn't memorize the information on the chart, that's okay. I didn't either. So we're going to go back to the prior screen. Notice that it left our little Excel spreadsheet thing up, which is super duper nice. And it can label the categories. So I have phone, electricity, gas. And then I don't need this fourth column, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. I have two labels, projected cost and actual cost. So I'm going to go ahead and label those. And then if I want, I can label a difference here as well. Then just plug in those numbers. If I type. Notice how I made those numbers nice and red for me. Gotta love that. You're like, thank you so much. Microsoft.
So that was just built into the Excel program.
Yep. And so notice what it did here. It I can close out of this if I want. And it's showing me this information. Now it is small because of the range of data. So if I wanted to make it bigger, then I would have to either get rid of that third column because then so that it wouldn't go both directions, or I would have to make it not negative. So if I wanted to go in and change it, so once I click on it, it gave me these options over here. So I can change the elements, I can change the styles, or I can change the what information I'm displaying. I can also just sort of go ahead and click in somewhere. It's easier earlier. Edit data. There we go. I was like, I did this earlier. It worked earlier. There we go. Edit data. And then instead of making the information negative over here, we could just make it positive so that we can say that there's a $46 difference. We don't need to see that it's in the negative. We just know that there is a $46 difference. And now it's a little bit easier to read because I'm seeing, okay, This information is all plotted on a chart. I can see that the difference is listed there on the top. And then all of the areas where we're overspending as a household and we need to cut back. Now, if you were going to critique this, Craig, what would you critique?
I understand we changed it around to make it fit better or look better and be larger,
Mm-hmm.
but it was easier to understand when we did have the negatives.
Good, good. And so that's some of the disadvantages with using something like this, is that you may say, okay, well, for the sake of space, I'm going to go ahead and do it this way, but it is easier to understand it if I lay it out with this information. The other thing that we can also do is it's still actually pretty small. Like the font is still tiny. I'm like squinting a little bit and I'm like sort of twisting my head on the side. I'm like, what are those numbers? How much do I need to save on the account? And so even with the changes we made, the font is still pretty small. So always something to be aware of whenever you're using any sort of chart or any sort of table, is to always be mindful of how small your information is getting. So you want to make sure that your chart is still readable if the information is communicable to your audience. Communicatable, not a communicable disease. We don't need any diseases here.
No.
Just fun stuff. No. Now for the things that I do a lot of things where I'm using connections with maybe culture, or I'm using images to help put connections to scripture. And so I do use a lot of images. You can always use a stock image, or you can do a Google search. Anytime you find an image that you like, you will have to be careful about the distortion whenever you make it large. If you're using something like a stock image, if I go and do a new slide. So if I have a stock image here, oftentimes they will already be in a format where you can resize them fairly easily, and it's not going to do anything too crazy. So for whatever reason, I wanted to grab the person playing on the piano and insert that right in. It's thinking really hard. Now it's in there. I can make this bigger. I can make it smaller. And the quality is essentially the same. Now, if I took a picture that I took and I tried to insert it, I would need to make sure that if I tried to resize it, that it still had that crisp, clean quality, and that it doesn't get that sort of foggy look whenever you find an image and it resizes, then you're like, oh, it's pixelated. So we want to avoid over pixelated images. You can do some really nice things with pictures. You can make them backdrops, backgrounds. You can have them as a key image off to the side, and then you could add some additional points in here. You can always insert a new text box. If you were like, wait a second, I picked something that doesn't have a text box, but I already added my image, you can either just do it again with a new slide, or you can insert a new text box over here on the insert menu on the right-hand side. I selected the text box option. And then draw a nice box over here, and I didn't align it correctly, so I would want to resize it so that it was the same size as the image. And it's not letting me resize it right now because I don't have any text on the inside and it doesn't like me. I want to go over here to my either size options or let's see. Right now it says resize shape to fit text. I may not want that. I may say, hey, just don't auto fit it. Don't auto format this shape. Just let me make it whatever shape I want it to be. And then let me maneuver the text size to fit that. Always be careful of what your sort of alignment options are doing over here on the right side with your text box. It's gotten me on a number of occasions where I'm like, why isn't my technology working? And there's something over here in the text alignment with your text box. So we have inserting images. You can insert videos essentially the same way. I always encourage people, instead of just sort of taking the link and pasting it in, to actually embed the video, because it's going to be a lot easier for your video to play than if you actually click on a link and then it'll open over to a new web page, and then it may not actually play from the web page. So I would always encourage people to use the insert whenever you insert a new tab, not a new tab. Whenever you insert a new slide, one of the options is to insert a video. And so I would use the insert video option, and it'll say, hey, what do you want? Do you have something down here that you've downloaded? And if you have a downloaded video, that's always better than if you have just a linked video. Now, you may not have the option, you may have to link the video, but if you have the option to download it, that'll always be a little bit easier on the playing side rather than from the other side.
Makes sense.
So we've covered adding things in, we've covered some of the design elements. Now let's get, with our remaining time, a little bit fancy, and we can look at some of those transition features, and then we'll talk about presenting a PowerPoint, which you already have some good information from. So whenever you're getting ready to present and you're thinking about how am I moving from one piece of information to the next piece of information, you can, of course, always just advance from one slide to the next, and that's fine. That's usually what I do, because if I get too fancy with my PowerPoints, then I'm distracting myself and I don't know what's going on. You can, however, also go up to the top here into the transitions menu. Now, transitions has to go from slide to slide. So it's going from one slide to the next slide. So I might do something like push. And so my first slide is going to appear like that. And then maybe I want to do the same thing onto the next slide. Just push it right on up. Now, anytime I add any type of transition or animation, I always want to test it. So you can either do the preview, or I like to actually just go all the way over into the slideshow menu and say, you know what, I'm going to test this from the beginning. So I'm going to hit the play button. And notice whenever it came on, it did that nice slide up from the bottom. To advance it, I still need to manually advance it. So I'm going to hit my arrow key. And then it advanced with that slide up to the next point instead of just the click, which is just advancing to the next slide. So again, that's inside the transitions menu, and you can play with these and see, okay, well, which ones do I like? Which ones do I think might be too distracting for my audience? Which transitions work really well for the content that I have? And so this, again, this can be fun. The other thing that we can play with is if you have multiple points on the screen and you don't want to have them all up at the same time, like I did in my presentation, then you can use the animation tool. So animation is whenever you want to bring to life just one piece of your slide at a time. Not the entire slide coming up, but just one piece of it at a time. So to use this tool, I want to first highlight the thing that I want to be animated. So I'm going to highlight the second point right here. And then I'm going to choose the animation that I want to use. Now for my slides, I used fade, but you don't have to. You could use something like float in. And that's how it's doing that there. Or if I'm doing another one over here, hit the drop down to see what else I have available. I could have it grow and turn in, which is kind of exciting. Stuff like that. I know, right? You're like, oh, well, I can have a lot of fun with this. And so you can spend some time sort of clicking through and deciding what things you like. You can also play around with the emphasis animation. So whenever you click on it, it'll have some sort of emphatic effect, like color pulse. And again, anytime you play around with this, you always want to test it. Now, I added things in sort of a funky order, so I'm sort of anticipating that things are going to be a little bit out of whack, but let's just test it out. So I'm going to go to slideshow. Instead of starting from the beginning, I'm going to start from current slide, because this is the only slide that I've made changes to that I want to test. All right, so the first slide is up. The first point is up. Second point drifted in all pretty. And the third point swirled in. And then I had to hit the key again in order to emphasize the first point. Now, in order to change that, if I wanted to change that order, I'm going to end the show. I would need to do stuff in the animation pane, which is currently not open. So over here, if I go back to the animation menu, on the right-hand side-ish, middle-ish, there's this option for animation pane. Whenever I am doing my PowerPoints, I actually live with my animation pane open so that I can make sure I'm keeping track of my life. And whenever you open the animation pane, you can organize what order things happen in, and I can click and drag this and move this up so that this is the first thing that happens. I can do some additional things in the animation pane, like I can say, let's do this one. Instead of having it do advance whenever I hit the button, I can actually have it start with the prior point. I can have it timed out so that it starts a second after I click. So if we did that, then we would do something like, let's see, slideshow, current. So it flashed. And then the second point came up right away because we said, hey, wait a second, and then come up after we animate the first point. And then there's that third point that we didn't do anything with. So again, I do like to use animation. It's helpful so that you don't have to just duplicate your slides and then duplicate and duplicate, because once you do that, it's not that it's wrong to just duplicate slides. Again, I've done it myself. But if you're doing any sort of transport with your slides, if you're sending them to maybe somebody else in the organization, or you're uploading them to Canvas or whatever, or even if you're just thinking about taking up room on your computer, duplicating the slides takes up more space than just using an animation. And so this can be a memory and space effective way to sort of reduce some of that while still having the ability to have your points appear sequentially up on the screen.
Okay.
I really like the animation tool. It sounds like you're doing a puppet show, or like, you know, you're doing really magic tricks or something, but it's really just a strategic way to work the system. Couple of other things that might be helpful for you as you're creating and then practicing your own presentations. We have in Microsoft a couple of rehearse tools. You have the ability to rehearse with a coach, and so that's going to be AI generated, not 100%, but it may tell you, hey, maybe slow down a little bit. You were talking really fast on this slide, or you only spent 3 seconds on this slide. So take these with a grain of salt, but you can always try that. So you would click this, and then it'll have you start from the beginning of the presentation, and you would click through and talk through your points. You can do the same thing here. So if you want timing for each slide, PowerPoint will record how much time you spend on each slide. So if your professor was like, hey, I want you to do this, and I want you to spend approximately 1.5 minutes on each slide, PowerPoint can record it for you and say, okay, well, you only spent 45 seconds on this slide, and then you can say, oh, I need to think of 45 more seconds worth of things to say about this particular slide. Whatever the case may be. A lot of professors will request that you record on PowerPoint. It's actually it's a nice function. This is only available if you're using the desktop version. It's not available with Microsoft Online, so you would need to download the app if you haven't yet in order to use the record function. Now, the other nice thing about the record function is that if you're using the notes, so if I click down here, notice the notes are almost hiding all the way down here. I can click and sort of drag this to make it larger if I wanted to minimize this. And then if I thought that I wasn't going to be able to remember the information that's on this screen, I can either have it on a completely separate system, like a separate computer or a separate piece of paper, or I can actually add my notes into this space. And then whenever you go to record, it will come over here, and it's not going to let me actually record because the camera is already being used for our Zoom presentation. But you'll notice up here at the top that my notes are right here. And the only thing that's going to be recorded is this space down here. And so I can read my notes while this part is being recorded. Now you can turn the camera on. I can't right now because the camera is being used, but you could turn the camera on or have yourself appear as a cameo down here so that, and you can move that around too, so that if you wanted your face to be down here in this bottom right-hand corner, if you wanted up here in the top corner, you can
Okay.
play around with that too. Very handy, very, very handy. And then once you're done with recording, so you would click this button and you would record, and it allows you to retake a recording. You can do it per slide, or you can record the whole thing in one go. It's really nice, really pretty self-explanatory. Once you try it out and play around with it a couple of times, I think that the Microsoft recording feature is very user-friendly. And I was like, oh, like I hadn't used it before until a couple months ago, and then I was just like playing around with it, and I was like, oh, this isn't too bad.
Okay, so I would record, say, if my immediate need is we have a slideshow presentation for biblical interpretation. It's
Hmm.
a large chunk of our grade. So let's say I go through and I do all my slides and I do record, and then I submit it to my professor already recorded. That way he's not controlling
Correct.
the switching of the slides.
Hmm.
Okay, so that along with practice and 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 being able to get a look at it yourself, that would be the main feature for that then.
It's yes.
Okay.
Yep. And then once you finish recording, you would go up here to the export, and that's how you would get it into something that you could submit. That's not just your slideshow. You would hit the export button, and then I can't remember what format. It's like an MP4 or something like that it's exporting to, but you would just name it whatever file you want it to be named, and just make sure you take a look at where it's saving to. Because if I have an Achilles heel, it's that I save things to places and then I'm like, I don't know where I save this to. So just keep an eye on where it's saving to. Any other questions on this space over here?
No.
Not yet. Cool. Feel free to schedule a follow-up visit. We're happy to help. But so record, a nice feature that I do use. Notes, a nice feature that I use. The other thing that I do, I do a lot of live presenting, especially for Bible study. And so whenever I present, over here in the slideshow space, I actually won't just do a regular slideshow, and it's actually already set up over here. It says to use presenter view. Presenter view is essentially what's going on here, where you, not exactly, where you have uh the slides will come up, and then you'll be able to advance to the next slide. But whenever what's on the screen will just be the slide that you're showing, but you'll be able to see both that slide and the next slide and then your notes. So I love using presenter view. It's my best friend. I use it all the time. Definitely recommend using it, not just looking at the slideshow. It's definitely an option to just use the slideshow, but I really like to use presenter view. It's not gonna let me do it here just because of how we're recording it, but it definitely will like that.
That box needs to be checked, or is the checked box default?
It was default on mine. I've been using this computer for a hot second, so I don't know if it's just learned that I like to use it, or if you might need to check it. It's under
So,
the slideshow menu.
okay.
And depending on whether you're using a Windows operating system or a Mac, so on my Mac, this option is actually over here. So just be aware that it might be in a different place just depending on the operating system. But you're looking
I'm a
for,
Mac man too. I'm used to
yeah.
that.
So you're looking for presenter view.
Okay.
Now, I do have a sample presentation. Are you game to take a look and do a little bit of critique? Do you have a little bit of time?
Sure.
Let's do it. All right, so this is a presentation that I did edit a little bit. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you made that terrible presentation. I did edit it a little bit to make it a little bit less good. But it does have some things that I look at and I'm like, okay. What I want to highlight about this presentation is that, so this image in the back, I created that image and I use that as a background image, and we use this on the workbook. So this PowerPoint presentation is one of those do it yourself from scratch. So everything has been manually done. all of the fonts, all of the sizes, everything. And so this is I think a good picture of why sometimes the do-it-yourself isn't as strategic, just because you're going to see, okay, that doesn't match up, that doesn't quite work, etc. So from this first slide, is there anything that as you're looking, you're like, something doesn't seem quite right, or this is something that we could do to make this better?
I like it.
Be critical, Craig. We need to find things that could be better.
I'll put my professor hat on. Start nitpicking.
That's right. So if I have my professor hat on, which I do, I would say, so right now, this part of the title is actually not inside the text box. It's partially outside the text box. So I think that whenever I sent it over, it distorted. So I was like, perfect, that's a great example. So I have a couple of ways I can fix this. I can make this a little bit smaller and then realign it this way. And maybe about right there. Now, I guesstimated that. I looked at it and I said, looks good. There's nothing actually formally aligned about that. In order for me to make sure that it's thoroughly aligned, I might want to throw some grid lines up on the screen and be like, okay, I want Philippians to be right here in the middle of this grid line and this one part to be right here in the middle of this one. But these are two different sizes. So I've made my life very difficult with my design elements here.
Mm-hmm.
If I really wanted to be nitpicky, I might say that this is a little bit hard to read, this font. So it's kind of nice for the title font. But for something that's a little bit smaller, I might choose to do something that's a little bit easier to read, like Arial or the Helvetica or something like that. So if I did, do I not have it on this computer? Okay. There it works. Now, as you look at it, it's easier to read. It's a little bit less pretty.
Yes,
So
it's easier to read, but you took your wow factor out.
yes, exactly. And those are the trade-offs. So I like to try to shoot for, if you're going to err on one side versus the other, you want it to be readable, because if they can't read what you said, then it doesn't matter how pretty it is because they can't read it. But I do like to experiment with fonts and try to get something that balances between this is readable, but it also looks nice, especially because, again, I teach ladies Bible studies, and so they appreciate some of those design elements as well. And if you're doing like a business presentation, again, you may want to sort of play with those fonts to find something that you really like. I'm going to jump ahead to this slide here. Got a couple of other things going on.
Your top middle box with the I entreat, that's awful small.
Yep.
Which
I don't even know how small it is, because you know what? This is a picture. This is a screenshot from a passage layout, and this is how I've chosen to display the verses. Is this a strategic life choice? I don't know, Craig. This is what I do for Bible study. So this is hard to read. And so what I might choose to do is to actually make this 2 slides. So I would duplicate this slide. And then from this one, I'm going to say, okay, I'm only going to take these first 2 points, perhaps. Make this spot smaller. Now notice what I'm doing though. So I'm moving the alignment. So the alignment of each of these boxes is going to be different. So again, these are the dangers of doing the do-it-yourself presentations, is that you've got all sorts of crazy things going on. All sorts. Then if I wanted to make that somewhat centered, okay, it's centered here, and then it's centered at least on the blue box right there. Easier to read. Anything else that you're like, meh, don't love it?
You know, the font in the bottom box is the same as it was in the bottom box on the first slide, which I didn't think it was all that bad, but
anything else about this font that you're like, meh, not my favorite?
the font in the bottom box or top?
Yeah, this stuff right here.
Nothing terrible. I don't know if I put it in red, it doesn't stand out.
Me neither. Yeah, the contrast isn't really good. It's not the worst contrast that we've ever seen, but it's not great. And it's one of those colors that kind of hurts your eye as you're looking at it. You're like, oh, red. And
Yeah.
so
If it's red, it must be bad.
if it's red, it must be bad. Exactly. I'm like, I mean, conflict is bad. But and if we're sticking with Arial, then I would stick with Arial. If I wanted to play around with something and just say, oh, well, maybe this one would work a little bit better, you could play around with it. I think that one is it chalkboard? It's at least that's not chalkboard. That is not chalkboard font. That is a lie. Oh, so I wouldn't want to leave this here if I wanted to have this be my font. You would want to be consistent across the slides. But something else that we could do once we had this, instead of editing this slide to make it like this one, is I would actually take these 2 points and I would copy them. And then I would actually duplicate this slide. Wait for it to load. And then merge. So that I could not have to resize this again.
Okay.
And that whenever I advance from slide to slide, all that's changing is the actual words, and I'm not getting that jolting feeling whenever you're changing where the positioning is.
Mm-hmm.
So something like this. So if I moved into the next verse, so I can get rid of this slide because it's a duplicate now. The same basic problems exist where you're looking at the size and you're looking at, and actually, so it looks like I did decide that it was at least too much information for one section, but I could just duplicate this again and take those points and put it there as well. Something else that I could certainly do if I decided that these background images weren't that important for us to see is I could click on this text box. And this is just a text box. There isn't actually text in it because I have this picture over top of it. And I can either go up here to shape format into the shape format menu, and I can play around with it from here. I like whenever the box is on the side instead of at the top. It's hard for me to work over here. So I'm actually going to double 2-finger tap and then open the format shape over here. And it's going to open a box over here on the right side. I don't know why I prefer it to be over here, but I prefer it to be over here. So I might say, okay, well, I'm going to change the fill a little bit. Notice what I've done is I've done a solid fill. I chose this color and then I turned up the transparency. So transparency means that I can kind of see through the box to the image behind it. If I wanted to make it so that I couldn't see through it quite as much, I could just turn on that transparency so that the image maybe isn't quite as distracting and I can see more contrast with the verses that it's displaying.
Okay.
The other thing that I did, this is minor, but I thought of it, so I have to say it, is I have soft edges on these. The edges aren't sharp. So I have a 6-point soft edge. So if I get rid of the soft edges, then it's just a box. But if I have the soft edges, then it just flows in a little bit more. I like to use soft edges again for Bible study. If you're doing a formal work presentation, perhaps not as critical. You can have some of those sharp edges. It's probably a nice addition for a workplace presentation. And those, I think, were the main things that I was hoping that you would spot. Great job. Nice work. What questions do you have at this point?
This has been quite helpful.
Awesome.
I'm sure once I start fiddling around, I'm going to run into some questions, but you took the fear away,
Wonderful.
and
Love
a
to hear.
basic understanding of at least what some of these icons mean and how do I find them and navigate between one and the other.
Yep.
Um, it was very helpful to see it because I'm seeing it as I would prepare, essentially, I would prepare a Word document. And
Right.
I get
Yeah.
all kinds of uptight if I'm out of line or
Yes.
fonts are funky or whatever. I have
Uh-huh.
problems with that. So this has been a very big help.
Excellent.
And I see up in the upper left-hand corner,
Hmm.
there's the off, and then there's an icon to the right, and then that button, the arrow, curved arrow to the right, right there.
This one?
That one would work the same as Excel and the same as Word, meaning it, if you do something to edit it, and you say, no, I don't want to edit that, or I didn't want to
Mhm.
change it, one click there takes you back to where the
Yep.
step before.
Yep.
I'm very familiar with that button.
Yes. And actually, I make so many mistakes that I have to use a shortcut. I'm like, it takes me too long to make my finger come all the way up here and hit this button. Using the, did you say you use a Mac or a Windows?
Mac.
Mac. So if you use the command button and then hit the letter Z at the same time, it'll undo. That's the shortcut for undo. And then I live on control command Z. I'm like, doop, 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 doop.
Command Z. All right.
Yep. So I use that all the time. But
Yeah.
yes, you
Well,
can't use that.
especially in learning mode, I'm sure I'll be on that,
Yep.
pointing out the buttons.
Yep. Now, something else that is nice, it's not specific to PowerPoint, but that you can use for any of the Microsoft products is you can use autosave. I do encourage people to use autosave. So you have to have it saving to something like OneDrive. So if I turn autosave on, it's going to ask me which OneDrive system I want to upload it to. I'm on my workplace computer, so using my LBC account is great. If I was using my personal computer, it would be saving to my personal OneDrive account with my Gmail account. And so again, that's just something to be aware of. Where am I saving it to so I can go back and find it later? Once you turn autosave on, any changes that you make, it's not only going to save the most up-to-date recent thing, but it's also going to save every prior version. And so not every single prior version, but every so often whenever there are major changes, it'll take a snapshot of what that is. And so you can go over here and go to version history. And I only have one version because I just turned autosave on. But if I turn this on an hour ago, then it would be like, here's a snapshot of the version that you had at 7:30. And then if you were like, you know what, I made that change and I shouldn't have made that change, but I don't remember what that change was, then you can go to the version history and take a look there. I have used that a number of times. It has saved my life a couple of times. I do appreciate. I prefer autosave. I don't hit save enough if I'm not thinking about it, so this will save your changes automatically. So we've talked through the philosophy of PowerPoint. We talked through how to the design elements, some things to avoid. Then we talked about how you can do it yourself, how you can use one of these themes. We actually walked through all of the different things, how to use this theme. We also mentioned using some of those templates. Again, I personally recommend SlidesGo. There are plenty of other great ones out there. They're fun to look through and just to look at some of the different ones. Be careful though, you can certainly fall into one of those vortexes and be like, oh, that PowerPoint presentation is so fun. That's how you know I'm a nerd, because I get sucked down the funnel with looking at PowerPoint presentations. Hopefully, again, this has been really helpful for you and for anybody who sees it later. We do have workshops coming up the rest of the month of June. May's almost at an end. And you can always, if you need help either with the PowerPoint presentation aspect or with any other part of your schooling experience, whether it's something to do with Microsoft Word, writing a paper, just having trouble with an assignment, feel a little bit stuck, feel free to hit us up for any of our one-on-one appointments or study groups. We're here to be helpful.